Terrific, Susan. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me to the to AmCham, to the American Chamber in the EU. This is a wonderful event. I'm very excited to do this with you. And let me also please share the regards of Secretary John Kerry, who sincerely believes in the importance of the US-EU transatlantic relationship and the importance that an organization like yours and your member companies are doing, which is connecting decarbonization around the world with American jobs and prosperity and competitiveness. It is critical to the work we do. Let me just take a few minutes to talk through some of the priorities that Secretary Kerry and the Biden administration have, the admiration we have for the climate ambition that the European Union's demonstrated, and why we think this is a massive opportunity for American companies and indeed your members. And thank you again, Susan, for the very kind introduction. As you know, Secretary Kerry represents President Biden as a special presidential envoy. It's a new position, and therefore he's been going around the world working with our key partner countries, the major economies or emitters, to raise their climate ambition. And President Biden made it clear that climate change was going to be a core priority of the administration from day one. He rejoined the Paris Agreement. Our relationship with Europe has been particularly special. You'll recall that the US and the European Union issued a joint statement when Secretary Kerry visited Brussels. It was his first foreign trip in office. More recently, Secretary Kerry and Franz Timmermans inaugurated the US-EU High-Level Climate Action Group. So we have, one of multiple high-level dialogues that are going on to make sure that we are synced and collaborating to bring our strengths to bear. The US and the European Union also collaborate in a range of other multilateral fora, from the G7, and you saw the communique that came out, the upcoming G20 to in the United Nations, and finally with COP26 coming up at the end of the year, kind of the capstone event of this year of climate action. President Biden and Secretary Kerry kicked off this critical year with the Leaders Summit in April of 2021 this year. And you saw there that 55% of the world's countries measured by GDP came to the table with existing or pre-existing pledges to limit global warming to 1.5 C limit, or at least keep that goal alive. Those commitments are consistent with the 1.5 C threshold. Now the focus shifts to making sure that the remaining 45% of the world also can come on board. And it's critical that, ahead of COP26, we bring as many major economies, major emitters on board as possible. Because the challenge is pretty stark. When we think about what the clean energy transition means, the International Energy Agency released a seminal net zero report earlier this year, in which they laid out very quantitatively what we'd have to do. Quantitatively, we'd have to build the world's biggest solar farm every single day for the next 10 years to ramp up to the deployment targets they've set for renewable energy. That's more than 1,000 gigawatts a year around the world by 2030. Similarly, it's not just the deployment of renewable or currently existing technologies. It's also the demonstration, the scale up, and the development of new technologies that are perhaps just emerging and haven't been commercially deployed. 50% of the emissions reductions to get to net zero by 2050, according to the IEA, need to come from those technologies that haven't even made it to markets yet. And that's why when we think about what we have to do in this critical decade through 2030, it's not just deploy the tools we already have, but it's scaling up and developing the tools that we need to have for net zero. That means 150 million tons of hydrogen production from clean sources in the middle of this decade. And it means investing in a range of technologies, from energy storage to carbon capture and sequestration to nuclear energy, to advanced renewables, advanced transportation, carbon removal, direct air capture, a range of digital technologies, and the list goes on. I can keep spewing these out. That there's a range of things that we need to do, particularly to help on those hard to abate sectors, your cement, steel, petrochemicals, long distance aviation, freight, shipping, et cetera. So we have our work cut out for us, but I'm thrilled to say that Europe has demonstrated just, signal climate leadership. We heard a little bit from Susan up front. The ETS, the emissions trading system, has led the world, and now we're really seeing prices that bite. It's sending a clear demand signal that clean and green technologies are what we need. As Susan mentioned, we are looking forward to seeing what is in this Fit for 55 package, but it certainly looks like it's going to be a very ambitious package to back up the European Union's high ambition. And I want to zero in on innovation. Innovation's special to me. I care a lot about developing this next generation of technologies. I was thrilled to see that at the launch of the Mission Innovation 2.0 just a couple of weeks ago, the European Union and Breakthrough Energy announced a partnership. I think we'll hear more from Breakthrough Energy later in the panel today on funding demonstration projects for some critical technologies, sustainable aviation fuels and long duration storage and direct air capture. We also heard that the ETS, again, which generates revenue, is going to at least partially support an innovation fund. And when the European Union did a call for proposals for innovation demonstration projects, 311 proposals, numbering more than 20 billion euros, came out of that RFP. So very impressive work. Now, the United States' goals and the goals of the Biden administration dovetail very nicely with what Europe is doing. As you heard from President Biden when he announced the American Jobs Plan, in addition to deploying clean energy at a massive scale, President Biden also wants to invest $15 billion in demonstration projects, including clean hydrogen. He wants to get our power sector to carbon free by 2035, and our overall economy to net zero by 2050. And there's a range of metrics along the way, 500,000 charging stations, I can go on, that are in the American Jobs Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure announcement that you heard about a few weeks ago. So the United States is very much not only behind the long-term targets, but also the critical actions this decade to invest in clean and green technologies, both the tools we have and the tools we need to develop. Let me just close, because I know we have some questions. I want to close by talking about how we collaborate with the European Union, particularly from the standpoint of the private sector. And I will say, having spent some of my time as an expat, I worked in India in the private sector at a renewable energy company. I'm deeply familiar with both the opportunities for American companies. We had American suppliers for some of our asset management operations for renewable energy, for example, but also the challenges that American companies face in foreign markets. The opportunity, however, is enticing. These could be multi-trillion-dollar markets around the world, and it's critical that we make sure that American companies have a fair chance at competing for those enormous markets, not just deploying our innovative technologies at home, but also capturing some of these major markets, shares of these major markets around the world. And Europe's a wonderful place to start. Now, it's not all about competition. I also want to stress that there are areas of collaboration. We can collaborate on international technical standards that help all of us, on pre-competitive research that helps the industry become more innovative as a whole, and on developing safe, secure, and sustainable supply chains so that our companies can collaborate up and down the supply chain and stake out our strategic positions. Fundamentally, I think that the balance between competition and collaboration means that we should focus on growing the whole pie. Again, these will be multi-trillion-dollar markets. And so the more we can do to support American companies, but also support USEU private sector collaboration, the more that both of our countries and organizations on both sides of the Atlantic are going to benefit from the rising tide of the clean energy transition. So let me pause there, but thrilled to be here, thrilled to share Secretary Kerry's regards and to underscore not only that climate action and ambition are critical to the President Biden administration, but also the competitiveness of American companies abroad and to capturing shares of these multi-trillion-dollar markets to create jobs at home. Thank you. Back over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Varun, for that sort of really sort of infused and sort of passionate sort of input, which we're really inspired by. And maybe I can pick up, just take this opportunity to pick up on the word there, collaboration, that you used sort of numerous times. And perhaps, I mean, one thing we were very excited about were some of the outcomes of the recent EUS summit. Indeed, you spoke about the high-level climate change group, but also there was talk of forming this a green technology alliance, and where they could identify areas for closer cooperation and collaboration when it comes to developing green technologies, which is what you've just been talking about. So what do you think this alliance should achieve? Could you give us some idea of what you specifically think they should be aiming at in concrete achievements?
Absolutely. Look, why don't I speak? I'm going to intentionally be a little more generic because, as you can imagine, many of these things are actually under discussion. But what I'll say, generally speaking, is that there are a couple ways to think about this. Our transatlantic technology and energy collaboration can be thought of broken down into topic areas. There are lots of exciting topics that we both think are super important. One of them is the clean hydrogen economy, particularly for these hard to abate areas. And there's a range of other technologies that we think are important. Either the US and individual countries like Germany think are very important, say in the automotive industry, or that we share with the European Union as a whole in terms of some of the high level strategic priorities that we've seen from the EU. And this includes a range of technologies. I cited some of them. The other way to think of it is in terms of modalities. What are the different ways we might collaborate? Well, we might, as I mentioned a couple of them, we might collaborate on technical standards. It's important, for example, that the US and the European Union assertively step forward, just as some other actors are stepping forward to dominate these standard-setting bodies. It's important that we do that. It'll benefit our firms and it'll open markets. A second modality of collaboration with Europe is research and development. And this is an area where American researchers and European researchers already enjoy thriving collaborations, and we can facilitate that further. A third modality is collaborating on third country approaches. So the United States and the European Union, even though we are currently the world's #2 and #3 emitters, we will account for a dwindling share of emissions if we're successful in what we're trying to do, which is decarbonize our economies. That means that the growing economies in India or in Southeast Asia, that's where the real work has to be done to develop, deploy, finance clean and green technologies. And so we can collaborate on doing that, making sure that technologies that we develop are contextualized for these markets. And finally, a fourth modality is we can promote business-to-business collaboration, both on the research side, but also joint ventures on the supply chain side. So there's really a range of ways to think about it. And I'd like us to think about a conceptual structure that attacks all of these different modalities. It's not, for example, just about research and development. Great question. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, no, thanks, Varun, for that. So, hopefully those are indeed areas where we can collaborate. I'm looking at the time. I've got a couple more questions, actually. Maybe we can combine them both. But one is, where do you see there might be differences in views? So those are some areas where potentially we hope we could collaborate. Do you see areas where we might have some differences? It might be more difficult for the EU and the US to get together?
Well, look, I like to think of it as areas of comparative advantage. You can imagine, the United States has a nuclear industry, and we will continue to support to ensure that we continue to get zero carbon energy from our nuclear plants, and some European Union member states may not. And so that there's an area where we are investing heavily in advanced nuclear technologies. That's an area of US comparative advantage. And there will be some willing markets in Europe and around the world where American technology can be successful. So it's not to say that these divergences necessarily need to preclude cooperation. In cases where there are divergences, the United States is just going to invest in what our comparative advantage is, and our companies are going to do, probably going to do better because of reduced competition. I'll also say that in many areas, it's less difference of opinions and more just difference in context. I think we have a lot to learn from how countries in the European Union, for example, Germany, have been very successful at integrating large penetrations of renewable energy. We should be sharing best practices on virtual power plant design, on grid codes, et cetera. Reflexively, we also ought to be sharing some of the lessons that the United States has learned on our clean energy transition. And so where we differ in our contexts and approaches offer opportunities, I think, for collaboration.
Thanks, Varun. And maybe one question so on the tip of our tongues for many over here is just looking over at Congress And we see that President Biden has this, ambitious, you could say aggressive climate agenda, but the majorities of the Democrats in the House and the Senate are really quite slim. So how are you advising the president, or how do you see him navigating that landscape and achieving these ambitions?
Look, fortunately, I'm not the one advising the president. I think Secretary Kerry, that difficult task falls to him. But
I meant Kerry. Yes.
But I do believe they talk constantly about this, and it's a wonderful signal to see the president come out strongly with a bipartisan announcement on areas that we really do agree with. And it's also powerful to see the president's legislative agenda, the priorities he listed out in the American Jobs Plan, and the unity of party behind him. I think the president has an extraordinary standing in his own party and respect across the aisle. If there's anybody who can pull this together, it is President Joe Biden. And, I think it's great that he has folks to talk to with deep experience in the Senate, like Secretary John Kerry, who was formerly Senator John Kerry and continues to have deep relationships on both sides of the aisle. So I don't disagree with you, Susan. It is a difficult position to be in, but forgive my vernacular, ain't no better team to get this done than the one we have right now.
Well, on that very positive note, Varun, thank you so much. I think we're inspired by that. We definitely feel there's a great deal of positive momentum in many ways, and including on the climate agenda. And we very much look forward to being part of that progression. So thank you very much. We know you've got a busy schedule, and we look forward to going to our business speaker now. Inspiring to listen to you. We hope we can connect again, and really hope we can stay in touch over the coming months and years actually on this. So thank you so much, Varun.
Very honored at the invitation, and best of luck to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.